Hello all, this is the Owl. As apparently my last intro was still too long, okay internet, let's dive right on back in. Because it's been a while. Volume 3 starts out with our standard gorgeous double spread, and again, I wish the anime and game had looked more like this. I don't know, I've always imagined Layer 4 with that sort of amazing electric blue palette. What can you do? We also get to know a bit about relics and grades. I do want you to note the special grade relics. One of these is Reg, and the other is the Unheard Bell. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the bell is going to turn out to be really, really important later. Because there's definitely something funny going on with time here. And yeah, we went into this a bit more in the recent theories video, and we'll go into it a little bit later too, because yeah, it really just does keep right on coming up over and over again. We also get, without a doubt, my absolute favourite Ozen panel in the entire manga. Damn it, that's just cool. And starting out from where we left off, Ozen has decided to train Riko and Reg so that our plucky duo can have a slightly higher chance than Zero in the layers below, where stuff exists that is even more dangerous than Ozen. In a pretty dense series of panels, she takes them to an obscure part of Layer 2, allegedly less dangerous than other places, but more importantly, extremely isolated, so other raiders won't be able to interfere with their training. Very Full Metal Alchemist, and woo lad, that reminds me, I will eventually do a video talking about my opinions on that manga and anime, and after Bleach, that's going to be a glorious garbage fire of a comment section. Something to relish. Regardless, we do get something of a training montage, primarily from the camp's perspective, as Ozen and the bandits secretly observe Reg and Riko, evaluating their strengths, weaknesses, and overall performance. Riko is courageous, game for anything, and knows a lot about caving, but she frequently overestimates what she's capable of and is also, you know, a kid. Physically weak and pretty vulnerable. Reg, on the other hand, is tough, resilient, and powerful, but is mentally weak, indecisive, and frequently a bit of a wuss. Riko acts without thinking and gets into trouble, and he hesitates when almost any action would be better than none. Oh, and this is fun. We get a brief sequence of an Autobus, basically a hippo, trying to eat Reg and eventually being vanquished by the party. This was, if you remember, the final boss of the story mode in the game. Ozen and her, I think he's some kind of advisor, finally reach the obvious conclusion. The pair will need to work together, shore up each other's weaknesses if they are to survive in Layer 3, and, should they reach them, Layers 4 and below. After 10 days, a battered and exhausted Riko and Reg return to the Seeker camp, and we get introduced to, yeah, as I said, the concept that the abyss is filled with weird temporal anomalies. For instance, the deeper you go, the more time dilates. So just a few weeks in the deeper layers could be months on the surface. And yeah, you think you got problems. I started playing Baldur's Gate once and lost an entire month. Where was I? Oh right. Orzen also says that, and I'm guessing a bit here, even she doesn't know how extreme this effect is on the lowest layers, and that it might not have been very long at all, subjectively speaking, for Liza if she's on layer 7. Huh.
What an odd thing to say.
However, Orzen also mentions something else. She warns Rico and Reg not to tarry in layer 5, should they make it that far. The oceanic layer 5 is the boundary between the upper abyss, where you can technically return to the surface from, albeit a difficult and dangerous journey, and the mysterious lower abyss, layers 6 and 7, from where no return is possible due to the power of the curse that deep, with the curse on layer 6 mutating you and stealing your humanity, as well as potentially killing you, and layer 7 just straight up killing you. However, she does give them one more warning. Most importantly, they should take all possible precautions to avoid running into any other white whistles. We get another nifty little panel showcasing these. Currently, wandering the abyss, Wakuna, the Chosen, who, yeah, we actually don't know much about right now at the current point in the story, but Chosen is an interesting title. Chosen by who or what exactly? Surajo we do get to spend some time with, albeit a lot later. But we're not going to touch that right now. And a certain individual known as Bondrude the Novel, Sovereign of Dawn. Oh boy. He, as it so happens, is the one worth Orzen's specific, direct warning. She warns them to avoid him at all costs, as he is, in her words, an out-and-out scoundrel, and that he's not as kind as she is. Wow, that's not ominous at all. Haha, Orzen, you're so funny. This next bit though, I'd totally forgotten about it until I did this reread, and it is pretty damn interesting. The letter Rico found, Orzen implies that, I think, Liza might not have written it, and that's only the start of the strangeness. The glyphs it's written in are archaic, and it's written on a mysterious relic that looks like paper, but is so tough that even Orzen couldn't damage it. Yes, this will naturally come up again much later, and it does make me wonder, did Liza find this note and go in search of someone, maybe someone who knows the truth of the abyss? Huh. Before they leave Rivendell, I mean the Seeker Camp, Orzen gives them some very interesting and pretty cryptic information. And you know what? Let's go through it, because, again, some of this will be important soonish, and some of this stuff, while it hasn't come up yet in the manga again, it's probably going to be rather important later. provided Tsukushi hasn't just forgotten about it. Firstly, in order to get down below the subterranean ocean of Layer 5, a specific relic is required, a white whistle. Okay, but Ozen, then how are these two supposed to get past it? Especially since you've warned them off the other white whistles. Are you coming with? Secondly, and more interestingly, the white whistles who made it down to Layer 7 speak of a ring. No, not that one. Although there really is a strong resemblance here, isn't there? There's a fun theory for you folks. And also mentioned creatures known as gatekeepers who live along the path to the bottom. Once again, Anyways, I just thought that was neat. Moving on. Back at the Seeker Camp, Orzen gifts the duo with that's honestly a really sweet design. Very Hiroya Oku, a souped-up pickaxe relic named Blaze Reap that, once upon a time, belonged to Riko's mother. Orzen does warn them, however, that it's nearing the end of its warranty period and will thus break down soon, with, at most, only a few more blows left in it. Spoiler, it barely gets used anyway. Orzen also gives us a bit more of an insight into Liza's nature, saying that she's probably found a better weapon by now. Yup, I would give pretty decent odds that Liza is going to be our final baddie. I'm sure we will get there eventually. A short time later, Reg and Riko say a tearful goodbye to Orzen, Maruk, and the rest of the bandits. Orzen, standing high up, watches the two small shapes recede off into the distance and eventually fade out, musing that she wanted to keep them longer in the hopes of, I think, Reg remembering something, which I think implies that Orzen knows what's up with Liza. Could you give us a hint? Reg and Riko make their way to Heaven's Waterfall, the entrance to Layer 3, a gigantic flue bordered with tunnels, and also the absolute worst part of the game. I'll explain why in just a moment. The pair stand at the thresholds in another just great double spread. Wow, is that amazingly eerie, and eventually make their way down, marking the point where the Riko and Reg portion of the game abruptly ended and the real game started. And speaking of the game, why is Layer 3 such an abomination? Well, these horrible flying rectal walls for one. Reg and Riko use smaller creatures from the caves along the side of the primary flue as bait, tossing them down to distract the myriad flying monsters and, using Reg's arms, slowly but surely tack downwards as a blast from the past. And as mentioned, Layer 3 is a notoriously horrible zone in the Made in Abyss game, with a mind-bogglingly confusing layout, tooth-grindingly fiddly climbing, evil traps, bizarre combat-focused arenas in a game with, at absolute best, okay combat systems, and, of course, Murdoka Jacks, flying monsters that will constantly zoom in and one-shot you out of nowhere when you're attempting to navigate the colossal labyrinthine biome. Yes, I still wake up some nights in a cold sweat, having dreamed that I was still stuck in sodding layer 3. Yes, I know, I eventually did find a few sneaky ways in and around the zone, and as it so happens, Reg and Rico adopt a similar strategy, crawling through Neritantan tunnels, that's just fun to say, which also provides them with monster bait and food. Ugh. I imagine it tastes a bit like Kui. No! After some time in the tunnels, they eventually pop out and see yet another ship embedded somehow in the rocky walls of the flue. However, as they emerge, they hear a familiar roar, and oh bollocks, it's the split jaw that Reg blasted way back on layer 1. Knowing what I know now about Reg's incinerator, how the hell did you survive? Reg prepares to give it another blast, and we cut over to what I can only describe as a very anime sequence, as we see Ozen and the duo training. It turns out that Reg's incinerator, despite being bonkers powerful, does carry with it some serious limitations. After firing it, Reg will lose consciousness within 10 minutes and will not wake for 2 hours, during which time nothing can awaken him. Thus, when a time comes where he must use it, he will need to deal with whatever is threatening them with a single shot, as if it fails, Rico will be left undefended, and the next time he sees her, it'll be because she is being pooped out by a monster. Better yet, they are to attempt to find another solution first, with the incinerator being retained exclusively as a last resort. Back in the present, Rico uses a sun sphere, basically a flashbang, to draw the monster's attention, and Reg attacks it directly, grabbing it and using his immense strength to drive it off the cliff face. And in a sequence that I really groove, we see it tumble down into the depths of layer 3, while flying monsters swarm around it. Yeah, that's just cool. Sometime later, we see that they are now almost 7 kilometers down, getting pretty close to the entrance to layer 4. Sure enough, Reg looks down and we get our first proper glimpse of the bizarre, watery biome of layer 4. Damn it, that's awesome. And yeah, you two, be careful and remember what Ozen told you about the creatures down here. Be careful. The next time we see the pair, they are sloshing their way through the iconic warm blue water that suffuses the layer in its entirety, drawn up and expelled by the Leviathan disc-shaped plants, forming the namesake goblets. Despite the heat and the danger the pair were warned of, Rico is exuberant. Reg, however, wants to find a safe place to make camp as a priority because Reg does not have a death wish. Layer 4 is indeed beautiful, but it's also really quite lethal. We also get a convenient reminder of how nasty the curse is now. Trying to ascend on layer 4 will, assumedly on top of the effects of the upper layers, cause you to experience excruciating agony as well as massive hemorrhage. Reg worries that Riko would not survive this and resolves to protect his companion no matter what. Oh, Reg, mate. Ugh. Nope. I'll be strong for now. They explore a bit further, but Reg keeps stopping, feeling a strange presence watching them. Indeed, we get a brief first-person perspective from another creature, showing us that he was correct. As they make their way, we get a few more panels showing us that they're being stalked by a bowling ball? What? Nope. It's this sinister mutant porcupine thing, which Riko immediately identifies as an orb piercer, a stupidly dangerous monster, and almost certainly one of the creatures Orzen was worried about. Now, before we go any further, I just want to give everyone here fair warning. The appearance of this creature marks, in my opinion, the specific moment where this manga changes. Remember, Made in Abyss was far from a success story when it was initially launched as a webcomic, and it wasn't until, honestly, I think basically now, where, at the advice from his publishers, Tsukushi took the story in a somewhat different direction. Yup, we're about to get our first true taste of what makes this story so iconic and infamous, even within dark manga circles, to the extent that it's mentioned in the same breath as stuff like Higurashi. In essence, it's about to stop being fun adventure with a bit of a gritty side and about to start being, well, Made in Abyss. And this won't stop for a good while. So brace yourselves, folks. You have been warned. Back over at the pair, they are cornered by the monstrosity, and Riko gives us a brief explanation of what makes these things so uniquely nasty. From what is known of piercers, as per their namesake, their quills can punch through steel and are exceedingly lethally, yes, thank you for all the corrections in the previous video, biology pedants, venomous, not poisonous, and the duo flees, with the monster in hot pursuit. Reg narrowly avoids it, as it easily catches up and slashes at them, and it doesn't take long for him to realize that they're actually even more screwed than he initially thought. See, the piercer not only outpaced them, it somehow managed to predict his movements and moved in response to attack. Oh, and yeah, the paneling throughout this entire sequence is pretty damn boss. Honestly, take note of the paneling throughout this volume and moving forwards. Tsukushi really does do such a great job with it. Ditto the lettering, especially when things get squeaky. Riko gives Reg her armored umbrella, saying that the piercer is afraid of things bigger than itself. No, Riko, that's bears you're thinking of, not whatever the sodding assholes that thing is. And sure enough, in the span of just a few seconds, it all goes horribly wrong. Instead of scaring it off, the umbrella enrages the piercer, which then wrenches the umbrella away from them, and when Reg turns, he sees that Oh crap. Riko has been impaled through the hand by one of the piercer's innumerous venomous quills. Riko apologizes to Reg, bloody hell, as she begins to black out. Reg desperately tourniquets her arm, but realizes their predicament. She's been envenomed, and the enraged piercer, that seems to be able to react faster than he can move, has them cornered. He considers using his incinerator, but rejects that idea. If he blacks out, Riko is done for. And yeah, here we go. Brace yourselves, folks, because rereading this and thus knowing what's ahead, I can feel my testicles attempting to retreat up into my body. You'll see why. Reg realizes that their only move is to shoot upwards and for Riko to suffer the curse of the fourth layer. Excruciating pain and massive bleeding. She looks at him and weakly tells him that it's fine and to go ahead, as she knows that she doesn't have much time left. Yeah, this manga man. And reluctantly, he fires his arm up, yanking them just out of reach of the piercer. And then the manga goes insane. Before we do this, once again, I want you to note how Tsukushi structures this, our first truly, made in abyss sequence, in terms of both the lettering and the paneling, because, it perfectly accentuates the utter nightmare that is about to arrive and make this all so much worse. At first, nothing seems to happen. Then, we see Riko's perspective begin to warp, likely due to the venom. She is surprised that there isn't much pain. Then, she notices something oozing rapidly out of her hand and realizes that the curse is beginning to affect her, starting to expel the fluids from her veins, and the venom is coming first. Only, we then see an objective shot from Reg's perspective that, oh dears, not only is Riko tripping balls, but is in a really bad way, and I wish I could tell you that this gets better. Reg, becoming desperate at his rapidly exsanguinating friend, realizes that the puncture wound left by the piercer is likely the source of the bleeding. Her other orifices are more oozing, but the hand is gushing blood, and if he does nothing, she's going to bleed out. Oh, and to make matters worse, the limb has swelled to the size of a small pig. He attempts to remove the glove, but the pain this causes Riko is unbearable. Riko, barely able to speak, turns to Reg and tells him to, oh sweet Jiminy Christmas, no, cut her hand off. Reg refuses, but a terrified and agonized Riko begs him to just go ahead. As a new father, this sequence is even harder to go through now because holy crap, this manga. And sure enough, Reg prepares to perform a battlefield amputation. And if you're at all squeamish, I strongly recommend skipping ahead to the next chapter, because this is about to get, just so much worse. Sorry, premiere viewers. A weeping and clearly traumatized Reg gently places Riko's arm onto a rocky outcrop and, using it for leverage, brings his strength to bear and snaps the bones in her wrist. And nope, I honestly don't think I can show you too much of this sequence. Just rest assured My beanbag is now nestled somewhere just under my ribcage. It is utterly harrowing and easily one of the sequences in this manga that I find hardest to get through. Note that I didn't say the worst sequence. Yeah. Anyways, with the bones in her wrist pulped, Reg, using a knife, begins to hack into the mush. But before he can separate hand from arm, a swarm of flying creatures, likely attracted by the commotion and the reek of fresh blood, begins assailing them. He desperately swats at the bugs before realizing that Riko has stopped breathing, likely having gone into shock. Now pushed beyond his limits, Reg begins to completely break down in utter horror and helplessness. However, he suddenly hears something behind him. He turns and sees this apparition, looking like something Miyazaki would produce on hard drugs. It tells him that Riko's heart is still beating, but that she's on the very edge of death. And then we get a mid-volume panel explaining the adorable Niddy-Tuntons. Nice tried, Tsukushi, but oh man, I'm gonna need a minute here. Where's Baby Owl? Dad needs some cuddles because Cheesy Pete. That sequence is legit hard to read, and I wish I could tell you that it gets better from here. Hey chaps and chapettes, do you like The Owl? Do you like Made in Abyss? Do you like video games? Want to talk about Made in Abyss while watching The Owl play video games? Well, why not check out our new Twitch channel, Pluggity Plug. All links, as always, are in the description. We're currently playing the hell out of Diablo 4, near, but we'll also be doing some Dead by Daylight towards the end of the month. We stream on Thursday evenings and Sunday afternoons. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Attendance is mandatory. Don't make me come looking for you. The strange creature tells Reg that they need to take Riko back to its. Okay, I'm jumping the gun. We'll tackle that in just a moment. But I'm going with her for now. Home. He follows her, and she explains that this area, for some reason, does not have the curse, meaning that they can move upwards without issue. Sure enough, they soon reach the creature's little dung ball-shaped house in a secluded grove within a secret area of Layer 4. As they make their way in, Reg notices cave whistles on the wall. Yeah, it's probably exactly what you're thinking, maybe, but we'll get there. And removing the armor, the creature finally identifies herself as Nanachi. Yes, I said herself. Ow. Okay. Sheesh, what was that? Half a brick? Let me explain. This fan favorite, Totoro, koala, cow, rabbit, kangaroo, a Totokawala Rubit, if you will, is the subject of quite possibly Made in Abyss's second most contentious controversies. As with last time, as this does concern identity, and people tend to get really prickly about this stuff, please take everything I'm about to say with a big pinch of charity and a fistful of salt. For a good while now, particularly since the English dub of the anime. Nanachi's sex has been kept ambiguous, to the point of it becoming, well, a point of contention, at least to Western audiences. This mostly seems to grow out of her usage of specific, vaguely masculine pronouns while looking, comporting, and sounding vaguely female, naturally coupled with some mild trolling by Tsukushi. After a now-deleted tweet asked him directly about Nanachi's sex, he decided to put the cat amongst the pigeons and said that he's not telling, and for everyone to just use their imaginations. This was, more than likely, just him screwing with people, because Tsukushi. But this, in combination with a girlish character who uses what was perceived as a masculine set of pronouns, at least in Japanese, was taken by Western audiences to mean that Nanachi was officially non-binary, to the extent that the primary translations used gender-neutral pronouns for the character, which is entirely fine, don't get me wrong, but I do think that this all boils down to a likely cultural misunderstanding leading to the situation being misinterpreted. What do I mean? So, the pronouns, ore, and more specifically, oira. Thing is, okay, see, I have never encountered oira in the wild. Ore, well, Japanese pronouns are rather complicated and do not map perfectly into English, and ore is a perfect example of this. While it certainly does have a masculine connotation, it is also used infrequently by adventurous, tomboyish young women, both in real life and in media. I worked at an all-girls high school for many years, and their softball team, for instance, like to use ore. I guess it sounded more assertive. Japan's actually a really interesting country, and despite its conservative nature, stuff like gender roles aren't quite as cut and dry as folks in the West seem to believe, especially amongst the younger generations. Wow, I spent more time on this than I intended. I do think that this is a case of ambiguity more so than non-binary-ness. And as I've always seen Nanachi as a female, as does, by the looks of it, most of the Japanese fandom, I will be using female pronouns for this character. However, please keep in mind that this is, at the end of the day, absolutely open to interpretation, and you are all big boys and girls. Thus, if your headcanon is of a non-binary or even a male floof monster, you are fully entitled to that interpretation. Okay, back to the story. Nanachi explains that she's a hollow. No, not like that. A term I will continue to use here, but in Japanese, as far as I know, the term is narehate, derived from narare or nare no hate, meaning a shadow of your former self. This will, like so many other things in this volume, make sense as we get further into the story. As a fun aside, as best as I can determine, her name essentially means that kid that says nah a lot. That's actually really endearing. Nanachi tends to Riko with a surprising skill and deftness. Yet again, something to keep in mind for later. But we also learn that Nanachi isn't exactly nice. It turns out she watched them for quite some time, basically just out of curiosity, including her watching them fight the piercer, and according to her, she only helped them out of pity. However, before Reg can respond, a strange sound comes from behind him. He turns and sees that it's coming from something that looks like a butt crack with teeth. Meet Mitty, Nanachi's companion and the subject of another of my favorite Made in Abyss memes, as well as one of the first overt nods in the manga towards Greek mythology. I've also often wondered if Mitty's appearance might be inspired by teratomas. No, please don't Google teratoma, at least not if you want to sleep tonight. Nanachi explains that Mitty is what happens if you attempt to ascend on the 6th layer. Mitty was once human, but the curse mutated her, and the process also blasted most of her mind clean. Reg asks the obvious question: if Mitty is what happens when you ascend, what the bloody hell is Nanachi? She hedges for a bit, but eventually says that she's an incredibly rare exception. She does tell Reg, however, that cave raiders tend to kill hollows. Although I'm not sure what's up with this, as at least until I've read, I don't think it has ever come up again. Regardless, she sends Reg out to collect ingredients, allegedly for an antidote to the piercer venom. And while he's gone, she rummages through their belongings, eventually finding Liza's white whistle, and this causes her to flash back to a strange, sepulchral voice belonging to a familiar figure, the White Whistle Bondroot, who Ozen went out of her way to warn the duo off of. Apparently, Nanachi aided him in the creation of cartridges. And yeah, as I mentioned, the entirety of Volume 3 should most rightly be called Pay Attention, this stuff will tie into something utterly horrific later. Yeah, those of you that haven't read this manga or watched the anime, well, firstly, go watch the anime, and secondly, remember the term cartridges. Insert evil laugh here. Nanachi treats Riko with a sort of parasitic mushroom, which filters out the venom, and Reg leaves her to recover, instead exploring the area behind Nanachi's house, finding it utterly filled with gravestones. Oh yeah, and this happens. Reg suddenly has a memory, a voice written, honestly, that looks similar to Bondroot's voice. I have no idea why, of someone saying, "I'll be going now, Liza," and then Reg stumbles onto a absolutely colossal burial mound, capped off with blaze reap. To make things more confusing, he then looks at his hand and sees, is that a star compass? What? Only when he looks again, both the compass and the burial mound are gone. And no, I have no sodding idea what went on there. Why don't you all try and explain this one in the comments? Reg puzzles over this. Orzin said that nobody was buried in Liza's grave. Why was there a burial mound? And what was that voice and the memory? However, his musings are interrupted when he sees Mitty, I guess, snuggling up to Riko, which, Reg asks Nanachi for her story, and while she's a touch reluctant, she eventually agrees to tell him. But first, Reg, who by now has realized that Nanachi can actually see the curse in the air, assumably because this is how she found this place, asks her if she can explain that. She agrees, with the implication that she will want him to do something for her too. And Reg? Yeah, this is one that you may end up regretting. In a pretty fun sequence, Nanachi, using a thin, gauzy blanket as a prop, explains how she perceives the curse and the force field as something not dissimilar to said cloth. A sort of omnipresent membrane. You can move down without issue, but moving upwards ruptures the membrane and you get zotzed. This gets a bit more odd when Nanachi goes on to explain that the creatures of the abyss, including hollows, can actually perceive this energy, and that's how the piercer was able to predict Reg's movements, meaning that, once again, there are some timey-wimey shenanigans going on. Starting to notice a theme. The pair do bond somewhat, as Nanachi, directing Reg, helps him to defeat the orb piercer in another pretty neat sequence that I actually don't understand. See, she explains that the only way to beat the piercer's ability to see the future is to uncouple your thoughts and your movements and essentially fight from instinct. But hang on a second. The piercer isn't reading your mind, right? It's reading the near future. So how does that work? And yes, I know I'm probably misunderstanding this one, but it is what it is. I'm sure you will let me know in the comments. Regardless, yeah, again, it's a really entertaining little action and exposition beat that manages to create a fairly endearing camaraderie between the robot and the bunnykins in what is also going to be another example of this series' tonal whiplash. What do I mean? Once they're done, Nanachi reveals Reg's side of the deal. She wants him to kill Mitty. Tsukushi, mate, who hurt you? It's okay. You can tell Daddy Owl because cheesy Pete. And this leads us to that part of Made in Abyss. You know, the one that, if you search for the anime on YouTube, is what will immediately come up, because this sequence is notorious. Alrighty then, let's do it. As an aside, while I was recording this bit, an enormous thunderstorm was passing overhead, and damn it, that is rather apropos. We start by getting a bit of Nanachi's backstory. An indeterminate time ago, she was a street kid who lived in abject filth and poverty, and later, along with other street kids, was recruited by, oh, that's not good, Bondrude, in order to help him forge a path to the Netherworld's next era. They set out with the help of his very odd-looking assistants, who we will later learn are known as the Umbra Hands, and travel a whopping 13 kilometers below the surface, deep into the oceanic layer. Later, she befriended another young girl who, yup, that's Mitty. And while there was something a bit off, in a sort of the Promised Neverland way about their accommodations, what with horrible screaming late at night that Nanachi attributed to a bird, everything seemed mostly okay. at least they had food to eat. Things got more ominous when Nanachi overheard Bondrewd in a discussion with a cave raider who expressed his concern at the White Whistle bringing children down to Layer 5 for an unknown purpose. Bondrewd brushed him off with some more pretty ominous lines, and yeah, I love how Bondrewd looks here. It's almost as if Tsukushi uses a different art style, creating an otherworldly effect, almost as if Bondrewd doesn't quite belong in this reality. And yup, before too long, we get to see what's been going on. Bondrewd takes the pair and places them into an elevator-like contraption consisting of 2 chambers, all the while explaining what's about to happen to them. He's experimenting in order to find a way to return from Layer 6 safely without mutating and losing your humanity. This contraption diverts the curse from both chambers into one, ideally sparing Nanachi at the expense of Mitty. And as the 2 plead for mercy, they are lowered down, and after the elevator comes to rest in a swarm of unmentionable gibbering horrors, it starts to rise, and yeah, this happens. We get to watch as a shrieking Mitty twists, ruptures, and collapses as she screams for someone to kill her, until finally all that remains is that. Nanachi, on the other hand, somehow mutated into her, yeah, I'll go right ahead and say it, her furry bait form, albeit being left massively traumatized. Bondrewd, curious about this effect, kept her around to, yeah, again, remember this, help him with his unspeakable research, which, oh boy, also happened to include Mitty. See, not only was she mutated into that nightmare, but she was also rendered utterly immortal, which Bondrewd naturally tried to understand by constantly mutilating and eviscerating Mitty in every way he could think possible, testing the limits of her immortality while gradually distorting her form further. Jeez! Eventually, this led Nanachi to grab Mitty and flee. Oh, and this is just heartbreaking. Remember when they heard the screams in Bondrewd's lab and attributed them to a bird? Well, Nanachi went and made a plushie of this imaginary bird for Mitty. Things only got worse though. Nanachi, now resolved to put her friend out of her misery, only ended up making Mitty suffer more, trying everything she could think of to kill her, but only succeeded in doing exactly what Bondrewd was doing, inflicting more pain and misery onto her poor friend. She even resorted to experimenting on mortally injured cave raiders, which, yeah, explains her medical and anatomical knowledge from earlier, having become, in essence, something like a lesser version of the man she loathed. Back in the present, Nanachi reveals why she believes Reg might be their one hope. Bondrewd possesses a great number of powerful relics, but one of his most infamous is Sparagmos, which, out of interest, is an obscure Greek term best translated as divine sacrificial dismemberment. Yeah, you'll actually see a lot of nods and resonances with themes and visuals from Greek myth around Nanachi, Bondrewd, and this arc. I wonder why. Regardless, according to her, Sparagmos is something similar to Reg's incinerator. It seems to utterly obliterate anything it touches, and the wound Sparagmos inflicted on Mitty is the only one that won't heal. Reg is naturally hesitant to straight up murder what was, at least once, an innocent child, but Nanachi tells him that it's okay, he doesn't have to do this, and that she will continue to heal Riko regardless. Reg is left at an absolute quandary, wondering what will happen to Nanachi, if she'll be okay if he were to follow through. Yeah, mate, I wonder. Sometime later, we see that Reg is no closer to a decision, and to her credit, Nanachi hasn't mentioned the matter again, despite his obvious moral misgivings about what she has asked of him. He does feel like he owes the strange creature immensely. However, demonstrating a decent amount of intelligence in a nice little bit of character growth, Reg decides to learn as much as he can about the situation before he decides. He asks Nanachi if she thinks Mitty is truly unhappy living together with her here. Nanachi explains herself a bit further, and yeah, in some more interesting resonance with Greek myth, particularly the fate of Prometheus, Nanachi knows that after she eventually dies, Mitty will be left behind, utterly immortal but also defenseless, and would thus live on forever in a cycle of being endlessly fed upon by the creatures of the no, shh, not yet, we'll get to you, mate, and regenerating. Reg also notices that, despite Nanachi's nonchalant mannerisms and superficially blasé attitude, she is despair-ridden and teetering right on the edge of a complete emotional collapse. Think this can't get any sadder? Well, Reg puts the truth together and confirms his concerns from earlier. After she found a way of killing Mitty, Nanachi plans on ending her own life. Bloody hell. Keep in mind that this is a kid, by the way. Tsukushi, mate. Now, beginning to sob, Reg forces her to promise not to do it, to which she reluctantly agrees, and he, in turn, agrees to kill Mitty, as Nanachi comforts him. She places Mitty outside, on a comfortable pillow with all of the stuffed animals and toys that she made for her. Reg prepares to fire, but Mitty's head rises as Nanachi screams out for him to wait. She rushes over to hug and comfort her friend, apologizing profusely before, in easily one of my favorite panels from the entire manga, Nanachi pulls herself away and, before she can change her mind, gives Reg the order. With his eyes filled with tears, Reg fires and Mitty disintegrates, leaving him sobbing and Nanachi shrieking in anguish. After a time, the two fall into each other's arms and finally start to calm down as Reg offers what comfort he can. And yeah, holy crap, this really should be on those top 5 saddest anime or manga moments lists, because that entire sequence is just sadness marinated in misery. It's like the ending of Jock of the Bushvelds had a baby with Old Yeller and named it Fluke. Seriously, what is it with all the depressing dog stories? Ugh. And I absolutely wish that I could tell you that this is the saddest moment in the manga. Regardless, this ends the volume, except we get a very brief epilogue. The scene shifts over to a darkened laboratory. Somewhere else, someone is observing their actions. Yup. Good luck, you three. Far beneath your feet, on layer 5, Bondrude the novel, Sovereign of Dawn, is waiting for you. Before we finish for the day, I want to give a huge thanks, as always, to my fantastic patrons: Jake Reagan, Piece of Yeast, Elspresso, Cheerful Satanist, Starwin Marwin, Kel Core, Jacob Ramsey, Crazy, James Bakes Bread, Wargle, Lance Goebel, Paul Norberger, Rafferty, Aaron Arnold, The Hedgehog Gamer, Simone, XTC Pill, B Empress, Jake, and Cheshire Quill. If you want to see more like this, why not stick around? Subscribe, bell, you know the drill. If you want to hear me say your name, get early access to most of my videos, have some fun perks on the Discord, and, help Mrs. Owl and I out or buy Baby Owl the necessaries, and ensure that I can keep on doing what I do into 2024, why not take a look at our Patreon? If you want to chit-chat about, well, basically anything, drop by our Twitch. We generally stream on Thursday evenings and Sunday afternoons, and we will be getting back to our usual schedule pretty soon. You could also stop by our Discord. Take care, my friends, and cheers. This is the Owl, signing off. Apparently, regardless,